Ex-prisoners, what's the most terrifying thing you saw inside a prison? I saw someone take a hot pot, fill it up with baby oil, add a pound of sugar, add some magic shave, bring it to a boil, then splash it in a person's face. It literally melted the guy's face off. This happened around 1999, and I still have the occasional nightmare about it. Story 2. Every weekend, the guards would get all the prisoners who were currently in chains around their ankles for breaking prison rules, and would get them to roll around in the dirt and then get beaten with a baton while they were on their hands and knees. It wasn't the prisoners you needed to look out for. Only violence I ever saw was from the guards. Story 3. Dude in the cell next to mine tried to took his own life with a sharpened pencil. He just kept stabbing himself in the chest, but couldn't get deep enough. He was hauled off by cuss kicking and screaming, begging for death. He was going to be deported. Story 4. A white kid gets absolutely destroyed for accidentally sitting on the front bench of the TV area on his second day. They waited for rec, then started walking with him. Every lap they made, more guys would tag along. Then once in the blind spot, they jumped him. 6. 7 guys beating a 120 pounds skinny little white kid. They were climbing up the fence and jumping down on his head. He was out within the first few seconds, but they kept on beating him until they CAS gassed everyone. They snapped his lower back, and he is now in a wheelchair, all for not knowing any better. The worst thing I've ever heard was a grown man being abused one night. He refused to pay a protection fee, and 3 dudes abused him. They stabbed him in the ass with a toothbrush shank. I've seen some crazy crap, but theirs were the most memorable. Sometimes I have nightmares about the abuse. I've never heard anything like that ever since. Story 5. A guy got stomped to death my first day in. The 2 guys fighting were rival gang members. The guards didn't do anything until the guy getting stomped stopped breathing. Then they came in and took them both away, one in a bag and one in cuffs. Story 6. A dude got 2 full kettles of boiling water poured on his head, and a convicted murderer explaining how he killed with an angle grinder, then disposed of the body. Story 7. I did a 4-month stint in Kajang, Malaysia. This Nigerian dude used to pilfer from other cells. This Malay gang found him and dipped his hand in boiling oil, basically deep-fried it while it was still attached to him. That scream, it still curdles my blood. Poor guy was reduced to an unconscious pool of blood, sweat, tears, vomit, crap, and piss. He lost more than his hand on that day. Story 8. Okay, so unfortunately, my bunk was close to the corner where everybody came to fight or whatever. So this one guy claimed that he was a gang member, but it was discovered that he was a false flagger. So the gang members put him in the corner and took turns beating and abusing him. He was in the infirmary for about a week. When he came back, the gang got him all over again. He was transferred after that. I promise there aren't many things more terrifying than hearing a grown man scream while he's being abused. Story 9. The violence was nothing compared to the people. The guy who taught me Scrabble beat his wife to death with a frying pan when she discovered his gambling debts. The guy who taught me poker tied up his employer in his house, and when the boss refused to give him the combo to his safe, the guy just burned the house down with his boss tied inside. I worked out with a guy who was caught with 2 arms and 1 leg in his trunk. He was in an Asian gang, had just performed a hit, and was bringing the evidence back to his people for proof when he was pulled over. His co-defendant was snitching, so he spent literally all of his time working out to kill the guy the second he got the chance. Before I got shipped to prison, yeah, these were all county jail, he finally got his shot and essentially ripped the guy's face off in the middle of a hallway in front of guards. It was a huge duck-up on the cops' part, to the point where it was rumored it was the gang that paid to make sure the snitch died. You live with these people, play cards, gamble, watch sports. If you're locked in your cell for a big game, you listen on your radios together and talk crap through the hatches in your doors. On Wednesdays, your chicken quarter is going to go towards a huge homemade meal for Westcourtver wanted to chip in. And it's going to be made by the 22-year-old Crip who's been charged with 9 separate murders and is seemingly the nicest person you'll ever meet. It's damn wild, nothing makes sense, and everything's dangerous. You're in this together, but at the same time, everyone has all sorts of rage just ready to blow. I had an AGG assault with a deadly weapon, as well as a separate case of unlawful possession of a firearm. So I had the pleasure of going to max units. Interestingly enough, the threat of constant danger actually helped things stay calm the vast majority of the time. Everyone's a killer, no one wants to be killed type vibes. I got stabbed with a Dixon pencil, but that was from Richard Busby, Mr. D my boss up and burn him alive. It was over a gambling debt he owed me. He's old and weak. I ultimately took twice what he owed me, and we were back at the table playing poker together that same day. Either you become one of them or you live underneath them. And once you're one of them, they're surprisingly and frighteningly good-natured and decent to kill a few years' time with. Story 10. My brother said a guy across from him had a new cellmate who had gastrointestinal problems and wouldn't stop farting these rancid, horrible farts after the guy told him repeatedly to stop, not like he could help it. So the guy beat the farter to death in their cell with his bare hands. My brother said he had never seen so much blood from one person before. Story 11. I was in a South American prison. There was a lot of addicts. They usually sold their food in order to buy more substances, so they were always hungry. One day, I was eating my lunch. Rice, a leg of chicken, and some beans. When I finished my meal, there were some chicken bones left in my plate. An addict approached me to ask if I could gift him the chicken bones. So, I lent him my bones, and he started eating them. It was heartbreaking. Story 12. I was never in prison, but in jail a bit for substances charges. I was in my 30s, but my bunkie was a really nice 19-years-old kid in there for selling substances. He seemed a bit over his head, but introduced me to the jits. I didn't know anyone, and we'd play cards and crap. He had a real high bond, and one day they said to get his crap he got bail. He didn't know who, but I was so happy for him. The next morning, the CO told me he was shot and killed that night. Being very respectful, everyone liked the guy. It was confirmed on the evening news. Really ducked me up, and I can guess who got him bailed. Story 13. Saw a dude get his head caved in his cell. A new inmate had come in and refused to show his papers. Another inmate came and said he was in court with him and he was a pedo. Later that day, the keys, as we called them, told him he needed to roll his crap up, basically ask for protective custody. He refused. Later that night, after we were all in our cells, his cellie took a pencil and stabbed him in the eye, then pulled him off his bunk and smashed his head against the wall till there was nothing left. Once he was done, he called the co over the intercom and let them handle everything. I could see this through our window as they were in the cell across from us. Keys is an inmate leader in each unit. The prison had a car for each race, at each facility, also an inmate. They were the shot callers for the facility. Anything big went through them. There was a key for each race, in each unit as the leader. They were the keys to the car, as we called it. Nothing happened in the unit without the key's approval for each race. So if there was an incident, it would go through to the respective keys, and they would approve of any further action. Story 14. Inmates being denied medical treatment until they are dead. I saw it twice. Both were diabetics, both elderly, neither had family support, and both had conditions exacerbated by the inhumane housing situation. In South Texas heat, they lock up 56 men per dorm in poorly ventilated metal buildings. On lockdown, they require you to stay in your bunk on a plastic mattress for weeks, only allowed a 5-minute shower every third day. I was 40 and in decent shape, and I thought I might die there. In the afternoons, the wall next to me was so hot I couldn't leave my hand on it. Shame on TTCJ and all of the employees. They put people in a terrible situation, and we allow it to continue. If they treated dogs like that, there would be pitchforks. End of rant. Story 15. Had a guy stick a full size. Took him to the hospital to have it removed. Days later, he did the same thing, in the same hole with a rubberized pencil. Rinse and repeat. Hospital removes the pencil again. Couple days later, while on active death watch, he managed to jam part of a styrofoam cup, playing cards and caulking from a cell window into his leg pocket. Took him to the OR. Doctors pulled out another inch of wood pencil, pencil lead, and fragments of who knows what out of there. I don't even think he knew what all was in there. Obviously major mental health concerns here. Hope he's doing okay now. Story 16. Honestly, most of it is the same type crap you run into in real life. Gangbangers, thieves, dealers, guys with anger management issues, etc. But the real problem is when you affiliate. That's what is going to keep you in prison doing worse. So I was in Lyman co-closed custody, so one level below max. Mostly chill people, but a lot of activity. The worst thing was they brought in a bus from Buena Vista. There was one kid, 23. Nice kid, just got into Rex because he was short-tempered, so they bumped him up to close. He had 8 months left before he killed his number. He's been in the pod 3 days when an older Pisa sees him and says he snitched on him when they were in Adams County. So Pisa grabs 4 others and they jump the kid in his cell. They beat the dog crap out of him. And at the end, they drug him out of his cell, propped his neck on the railing, and one big-ass dude just smashed his neck with a kick and snapped it. Flight for IVE comes, but it's not going to help. All the guys catch a murder charge. But the ducked up part is the older Pisa yelled, "Duck you Comenes," when his neck snapped. Kid's name wasn't Comenes. It was like Garcia. The Pisa had mistaken the kid for someone else. 8 months left. Kid was arrested at 17, 23 years old when he died. Never even saw the outside of a facility as an adult and killed in a case of mistaken identity. Prison could pop off like that. Story 17. When I was 20 years old, I thought I wanted to be a correctional officer. One night I was sent to work at the medical ward where each inmate had their own isolated cell where they were let out twice a day. That night, I was going around with the nurse giving the inmates their medicine, and we came to one inmate's cell. And as soon as we opened the door, I was knocked back by the most putrid smell I have ever smelled in my life. I've been to the dump plenty of times in my life, and it was nothing in comparison to the smell this inmate had going on. Once we were done giving out the medicine, I went up to the officer training me and asked him what was going on with that inmate and why he smelled so awful. He said, "Oh, you met Grady?" He craps and pisses himself on purpose. He never changes or showers, so he constantly lives in his own filth. I found out that he was abused once in prison, so he started crapting and pissing himself so he wouldn't be abused anymore. Story 18. Father has assault charges. Was in juvie my bad, forgot the word for kid prison for 5 years. 1982 to 1987, he was friends with someone he didn't know was an abuser. He was forced to beat him up or he would be killed for sympathizing with the abuser. Story 19. I was held without bail in county jail for 2 weeks. We get to watch TV during rec. We were watching the news one day, and this guy was arrested for killing a judge's brother by stabbing. He was a mean-looking skinhead with neck and face tats. Next day, he's now in my cell block, looking extremely on edge. Turns out, the guy he killed assaulted a female member of his family. Although set to get a prison sentence, he killed for his family's honor. Story 20. Was playing chess and heard some noise. Turned around and a black dude looked about 60, had a seizure while he was standing up and fell onto the metal seat at our table. Blood was absolutely gushing out of this dude's head. I have a friend W. epilepsy so new to put him in recovery position and keep away from his mouth. The SEOS showed up and shackled, cuffed him while he was still seizing. As he convulsed, the cuffs cut into his wrists and ankles deeply. Started yelling at them. What the heck are y'all doing? Get a gurney and call 911. They told us to lock down on our bunks in Stefu or we're going to seg. No one shut up. Can't take us all. They instead ushered the entire pod into our outdoor rec area, 30x15 enclosed room with a 4 inches slit 10 feet up for fresh air, and kept us all out there. Watched this dude seize for another 15 minutes. Blood in a pool all around him from his head, wrists, and ankles being mangled. They eventually took him out and I never saw him again. Almost certain he died. We stayed locked in the yard for 4 hours and were threatened to not discuss it. Another story. In another unit in the same month, a guard suplexed a dude who had to weigh 110 pounds wet for talking back to him. The guy broke his neck and died. The guard was charged manslaughter. Not sure if he was convicted. Next story was playing Scrabble, waiting on the phone to open up. A dude was on the phone with his wife and kids and started losing his crap all of a sudden. He started yelling in the most guttural, heartbreaking way, "No, no, no." The guards were like, "Hey, calm down now." While he was on the phone with them, someone did a drive-by on his house and shot his wife and killed one of his children. The guards snatched the phone from him and threw him on the ground, restrained him, and took him to SEG where there are no phones. Guy was weeping, saying he just heard his baby get killed on the phone. They just took him to SEG. Never saw him again either. Story 21, relayed by a friend. But he said the craziest thing about prison is how you inevitably meet someone who is more psychotic, sociopathic than the next guy. You think you've met some bad dudes on the streets, but there's always a bigger fish. Story 22. Not me, but I spoke to a former inmate after his release who had developed severe PTSD from some of the things he witnessed while incarcerated. One of the stories was that he was playing cards with some guys, and one of them was smoking a cigarette. Another inmate who was not playing with them approached the table and asked the guy smoking if he could get shorts on the cigarette. Shorts means, before you finish smoking, you gave the cigarette to someone else, so they got the last few puffs of the cigarette before putting it out. The smoker agreed, the inmate wandered off, and they went back to playing cards. Well, the guy playing cards must have forgotten and finished the cigarette. A little while later, the other inmate came back to the table asking for the short, and the guy at the table told him that he had forgotten about it and finished the cigarette. Guy wanders off again, and they go back to playing cards. Shortly afterwards, the inmate who wanted shorts comes back to the table, comes up behind the player, pulls his head back, and started shanking him in the eye and throat with a pencil. Dude died over forgetting to give someone a damn cigarette butt. Story 23. Been in a South American prison, right in Los Andes. Working on a mine next to it, we used to stay there as temporal shelter from the cold. People there were murderers, thieves, smugglers, but not rapists. That people were stripped naked and beaten, then left to death in the cold desert. Once we were arriving and there was what was left of some dude, purple from the frozen blood. Guards didn't even realize he was missing. My boss was not ready for that. She never came back to work and was attending depression rehab for some time. Story 24. I'm not a con, but my dad told me when he was upstream, guards informed them that they had a high-case child abuser coming in. When the guy got there, he ended up being this old white man walking with a cane. He didn't last very long on the courtyard. They killed him on the prison yard. Story 25. Crazy story. But was in for a few days and didn't realize they put you in cells based on the color of your skin. I'm a white dude with a Hispanic last name, and they put me in a cell with a straight Nazi who told me if I went to actual prison, I was only in for a weekend, that I would be a misfit because I wasn't one thing or the other. He openly called the black dudes next to our cell horrible things. Story 26. Physician here, hospitalist. And we see patients from nearby prisons across the state for various reasons, mostly violence. But this was self-inflicted. Patient was found in solitary with several nails that he'd removed from the wall inserted inside his banana. Actually didn't do that much damage. Most were removed while in the ER. the rest surgically removed. After a few days, sent back to solitary, only for him to return with even more nails. Story 27. Not terrifying. Exactly. But once a water main near the prison broke in the late afternoon, and the white shirt on duty, the senior administrative correctional officer, just kind of decided to believe that the problem would get fixed quickly enough that no emergency steps were needed. This was summertime in Florida, BTW. Within maybe 5 hours, the toilets were overflowing with feces, and people were literally crafting on newspapers on the ground like dogs. It was hot, flies were everywhere, and the only water we received before 10 a.m. the following morning was a single 4 Oz half cup. After the incident ended, a handful of inmates initiated the grievance process, which was the first step to build up to a lawsuit. Those inmates were individually brought before the head administrative white shirt, a colonel in dock parlance, and told in no uncertain terms that if they proceeded with the legal process, they would be beaten to death, and the paperwork would reflect that they had died while attempting to kill a correctional officer. Story 28. Obligatory, not a con, but my brother did work for a hospital near a prison. One day while he was there, inmate is admitted for an infection around a stoma where his colostomy bag was. Long story short, he had been letting dudes use his stoma for dirty relief in exchange for commissary, and had not only infected it, but also had chlamydia in his stomach cavity. Story 29. I work in jails across the country. There are many unsettling moments. Violence between inmates, psychosis. But the moment that sticks out by far for me, one day I was helping a doctor. When she's helping her patients, I try and stay out of the room so that way I'm not interfering with her work. For some reason, the specific patient that she was working with had stuck out in my mind before. Though I see hundreds a day during MedPass where I follow a nurse from cell to cell, I specifically remember seeing this man. He was relatively young and very polite, which is what stuck out at me. He always said, "Hello, ma'am, how are you? Thank you, please," etc. I remember looking at the chart to see what his name was. I rarely remember names. I actually feel it is better not to. Anyways, I'm standing in the hallway outside the doctor's office when another patient who is sitting on the bench waiting to be seen says to me, "Stay away from that guy. He's a crazy MF." I laughed. BC, it is one inmate telling me to stay away from another inmate. I don't even let anybody stand behind me or within 5 feet of me. My laughing changed his tone. He got a lot more serious, his voice raised in intensity. "No, I am serious. Stay away from that MF. He is crazy." "Okay, point taken." I nod my head, and in that moment am thankful for the COV masks that hide my reaction. Not a moment later, the corrections officer comes waltzing down the hallway, swinging his keys in his hand and whistling, "Oh, hey, that's Body Bag Leg," name slightly changed for privacy. My eyes immediately widened. I Googled him later. That man had a GF. She got pregnant. She didn't let him see the baby when it was born. He wanted custody. He and his fam, mom, dad, brother, planned and successfully executed all 10 of her family members. Anyone who could possibly get the baby before he would receive custody. And maybe I'm misremembering, but I think it worked. I believe he had custody of the kid for a while until he himself came forward and confessed and threw his whole family under the bus and accepted his punishment. I think he became super religious, or maybe the guilt got to him. I remember his cell always had 100 crosses taped to the walls. I've had scarier moments in jail. Whole cells having to go on lockdown because they see a girl working. A lot of people pleasure himself at you. But Body Bag Lag will always stick out to me. Story 30. Not an ex-con, but prison admin staff. Right before I started working there, a man was on a classification override at my facility, meaning he was too dangerous to be at this prison, but got to be there for some reason. He was psychotic and talking nonsense to his 2 cellmates. When all of a sudden he screamed he was the devil, and while the other cellmate was frantically hitting the emergency button. Responding staff had mandated in-house therapy as a result. Horrific. Another was when I was working. A young man in for gang stuff brutally beat to death an old man who was just admitted for child crimes. Turns out the man abused this kid's younger sister. They didn't have the same last name, and she wasn't listed to classification staff, so no one knew. Responding staff said his head was kicked in so hard it was unrecognizable and had a consistency of jello. Story 31. I was inside a female prison, so my perspective is a little different. For one, all prisons are different, from county level to state and federal. I was in state for most of my time. A couple things were pretty terrifying. For one, the amount of sex between guards and inmates was ridiculous. It was consensual in that they both said yes, but it can never really be consensual when it's a guard and inmate. The power difference is just too much. You couldn't really say no either. It's not that the guards would retaliate. It's that they wouldn't protect you when another inmate or group of inmates attacked you. The really creepy thing in mine was the pedo lady. She was a lifer. No one actually messed with her because it seemed like the guards were on her side for reasons we suspected. She was also really friendly to new inmates, particularly younger-looking petite inmates, for reasons you can imagine. They were owned by her if they let them. like a small gang in jail. They all had the same prison tattoo, which I didn't realize till I was in the shower with a couple of them. Story 32. Be me, skinny white kid. Got back from my job in the canteen filling orders to everyone in my unit making O shapes with their hands. Didn't understand. Got to my cell, CAO unlocked it, and there's a massive black man loudly sleeping on the top bunk. Says, "Oh yeah, you got a new roommate," and slams the door shut. He was actually chill, and oddly enough, he never asked for bottom bunk status, so I actually got a lot of credit in the unit for that. But for those first few days, it turns out those O-shapes were people telling me how big my hole was going to be when he was done with me. First 2 months in. Also, being the front unit of the place and seeing all the ambulances come and go after code yellows and blues. In fact, just the code blues being called and everyone having to go back to their cell and knowing somebody is getting ducked up enough to need an ambulance. Story 33. Boiling hot peanut butter dumped on a sleeping child molester's face. The screaming and thrashing was pretty intense. The idea is that you can't wipe it off or something to mitigate the damage caused. It's going to burn deeply. And in my opinion, that was worse than watching a guy on the bench press take a 35K plate smashed to the skull repeatedly. He was dead pretty quickly. The peanut butter burn is a permanent disfigurement that will have months of pain and suffering. Story 34. I remember a response about hearing inmates grind their shivs all night before a riot, knowing you'd be fighting for your life soon. Story 35. I was sitting in TV room in the feds. The inmate phones in this particular institution are situated in little phone booths. No idea why, but on the move, a guy ran up in the housing unit and beaten the guy with knife 15 or so times in the booth, 3 in the face. Dude couldn't go anywhere, slumped immediately. Second, 2 guys in the kitchen made a bet that one of them wouldn't go through the commercial dishwasher. Guy took the bet and went through, came out the other side as one human-sized blister. 100% of his skin was blistered full of juice. He was airlifted out in a bubble-wrap suit to hospital. I was fresh in at the time and working in the kitchen when this happened. But I wasn't in the dish room. The blood-curdling screaming as the dishwasher cycled on still gives me goosebumps 10 years later. And I can't unsee what a human covered in blisters looks like. I don't know if he survived, as they don't give updates to inmates. I do know the guy who bet him was charged with fresh street charges. And there are plenty more. Story 36. Not myself, but my friend did 7.5 years at a notoriously violent prison. I'm just going off memory now, but there is a canteen area you go to buy things. You can only go at certain hours of the day or something like that. They have inmates called PCS, or protective custody. Usually they are criminals who are pedo. Anyways, to get to the canteen, you have to walk through a hallway that has security doors on both ends. The other end is the canteen just past the door. PCS were only allowed to go to the canteen at a specific time for their own safety. I can't remember why, but this one time they had to go with the general population. The PCS had to walk through this long hallway with them. During the walk, suddenly the prison went into lockdown. All the doors locked in the prison, including the doors behind them and in front of them. I don't remember if he said there was a guard there or not, but either way, it didn't matter. There was no way for the PCS to escape, and the general population inmates took their opportunity and beat the living hell out of the PCS in this lockdown hallway. There were multiple severe injuries and 1 death. My friend wasn't a part of the brutality, but they were knocking out teeth and breaking their fingers. One PC was beaten so bad he went into a coma and passed away only a day later. Others had broken legs and arms, etc. What troubled me quite a bit was my friend telling me how much blood was everywhere. It had stained the floors and walls. Hence how it got its nickname from then on, Blood Alley. I remember him telling me every time he went to the canteen, he would basically relive the situation. Guess that story horrified me enough to remember specific details. Story 37. Dad got his neck slit for standing up against gang leaders. He's been in prison for 23 years, and after that day hasn't had an issue since. Grabbed his throat to stop the blood, took the knife, and beaten the guy. Story 38. I don't know if this counts, but my dad was in prison with Richard Speck, who is, if you don't know, an American mass murderer who brutally murdered and abused 8 nurses. My dad told me during his time in prison, Speck bragged about what he did all the time, and said prison was a wonderful vacation for him, and he would do it all again if he had the chance. He would even go as far as saying how much he loved to kill those women. So sickening. Speck also made 18+ film in prison, which I'm sure is on the internet somewhere. Story 39. As an attorney, I saw a guy who had been a serial killer targeting young girls. He was asking for help with his sentence. He was sentenced to life in solitary, an obviously illegal sentence that isn't and wasn't being enforced. But even the most dedicated nonprofit defense attorneys I've ever met refused to help him. They sure didn't tell that to his face, though. This guy was damn huge, like pro wrestler type shape, white, clean-cut, handsome, relaxed, and personable. But inside, he was a subhuman monster, an abuser and killer of young girls. His soulless eyes are some of the scariest things I've ever seen. If you saw him on the street, he'd look perfectly healthy, normal, unless you looked in his eyes. They were crazed and empty, like his whole face was saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And his eyes were howling and screeching incoherent panic nonsense. Story 40? Not an ex-con, but a former CO. I've got some stories. Guy once stopped taking his psych meds. We were alerted by medical minutes before he shoved a pencil through his celly's eye over an open ramen packet. Luckily for the celly, the pencil went in between the eyeball and the socket and didn't do any real damage. Hell of a way to get woken up from a nap, though. On the non-physical side of things, I found CP in a chomo's cell during a routine search. He had it mixed in with nude photos of adult women, which is how my brain clicked to what I was looking at. The kitty photos were cutouts from children's dance and gymnastics catalogs, as well as ads from magazines that showed young girls in bathing suits. They were such innocent photos, and I feel like that somehow makes it worse. When we couldn't get him removed from the tier, as punishment or for his own safety, we didn't care which, my sergeant broke protocol and flat threatened dude with exposure if we found anything like that in his cell again. Story 41. When I was going to college at West Virginia University, I got arrested for underage alcohol possession and was sent to Doddridge County Jail. I was put in a holding cell with a bunch of guys. Toward the end of my stint, there was a kid, maybe in his early 20s, who told me he was in for a coke deal gone bad. The purchaser tried to run without paying. He calmly told me that he ran over the poor git with his car and wasn't sure if he was dead. Told me he had a great future ahead, was on a rugby team, had money and girls, and now he could be looking at life in jail. Before he was there, I was going stir-crazy, pacing around and making all the people around me annoyed, but hearing his story made me feel better in a weird way. Story 42. Once watched a man elbow another dude in the face 40+ times because he was a suspected goof. Completely destroyed the man's face, broke, nose, most of his teeth, and nothing happened from it. Dude got 5 days CCC, and the guard that dropped the hint about the dude's crimes brought us extra jug-ups and meals at mealtime for 2 weeks. Here's the twist, though. Dude that got his face wrecked just unfortunately had the same name as the dude that was supposed to get it. Guards didn't even give a crap. Story 43. I saw a guy get attacked by a dog for taking a banana out of the dining hall. Co told the guy to stop, and something in the inmate's movements triggered this dog and it attacked him. As he screamed for help, the unit manager piled on him and put an elbow in his neck. This was at a minimum security camp where there shouldn't have been a dog in the first place. 90% of these inmates were alcoholics or dealers. And this particular inmate was already on medication that made him pretty drowsy and out of it all the time. And as the result of this encounter, they sent him to the hole, upped his dosage to where he couldn't remember his name or where he was, and slapped him with an assault charge for struggling against the unit manager while he was pinned and being mauled. And it all conveniently happened in a blind spot of the prison where the cameras don't reach. I think about this every day. I met some pretty ducked up people while I was in, and the worst of them were the ones running the place. Story 44. My bunkie was this tiny little woman in her 40s with crazy eyes, who would sit on top of her bunk and chant for all hours of the night. She had a reputation for being nuts and just straight up weird. Needless to say, 21-year-old me was freaked TF out when I got moved into a cell with her. She was on the top bunk, me on bottom, and she did, in fact, sit up at all hours of the night chanting and talking to herself. I called my mom one night and she pulled up her case information. Allegedly, my bunkie was serving a 40+ year sentence for stabbing a boyfriend in the ear with a screwdriver, along with a handful of other charges. Fast forward a few weeks. This woman and I became closer than I ever imagined possible. Not sexually or romantically, but she became like an overprotective mother, bear to me. So much so, that's what I started calling her. Mama Bear, and she called me Baby Bear. And she made sure everyone knew to leave her baby bear alone. Fast forward to one evening after dinner. Every night, I took my shower at the same time after chow. By the time I got out, Mama Bear would be back from her Zumba classes and jump in right after me. So one night, Mama Bear is still out when this big bish cuts in front of me for the shower. Shower line is always a pretty big deal in there. But I didn't really care because I wasn't in a hurry anyways. And I figured I would just take mine later, or after Mama. Then Mama Bear walked in. First thing she asked me was why I didn't take my shower yet. I explained the situation and calmly told her someone else got in before me. But it was okay and I would shower later. It was not okay. Mama Bear got the craziest look in her eyes and says, to no one in particular, "Nobody damn cuts Mama Bear or Baby Bear." I follow her as she's storming towards the bathroom. This woman then goes into a blind rage and proceeds to rip her clothes off, rip down the shower curtain, and climb into the shower with the bish who cut in front of me. The whole time Mama Bear isn't blinking while Big Bish is looking stunned like WTF is going on. Then Mama Bear, while staring into this woman's soul, snatches the soap right out of Big Bish's hand, starts soaping herself up with it while screaming at her, "You want to cut me in my bunkie? Who want to take her turn? Who want to take mine? We are showering in this idiot together, then escort." Big Bish didn't even wash off. She just grabbed her towel and ran TF out of there as fast as she could. Mama Bear then finished her shower and went on to play cards like nothing ever happened. Needless to say, nobody ever cut me during showers ever again. Mama Bear was definitely certified damn nuts, but boy did I grow to love her. Absolutely the best bunkie I could have ever gotten. May even have to look her up in 27 more years when she gets out. Story 45. When I was in primary school, P7A escort got murdered across from the school. Tracy Wild. It ended up a cold case 20-odd years later. I share a cell with some Asian dude, Chinese to be exact. Dude had fast food restaurants, kids, nice house, the lot. He had a fight with a friend and got DNA, and turns out he murdered said escort. Small world when I think about the chances of that happening. Seen people who injected substances and done it wrong and now have big holes in their legs. Story 46. This is going to take some explaining, so sorry. It's on the long side. I was in a medium and low-risk facility in Nye State for women for almost a year. Medium and low risk means the crimes of the women typically aren't violent or something most would consider a heinous and serious crime. There is a maximum security prison in Bedford Hills for those types of offenses. But if, say, you committed murder, and after a while of being in the facility, you never got into trouble, as in never got a ticket by an officer, weren't involved in fights, weren't caught with contraband, you assigned duties, kept your room area clean, and a bunch of other things to be a good inmate, eventually you would have your status lowered and could be transferred to a lower risk facility. It also works the other way around where, as in, you get into fights, are caught with substances, cheeking meds, are put in lock or shoe a lot. You will face the possibility of being sent to Bedford. While I was there, it was at the height of the COVID epidemic, and the facility went from having about 1,000 females to less than 400. They were sending everyone home that they could, which also meant some leeway and guidelines changed concerning the evaluation of inmates' so-called risk level. So some girls from Bedford were transferred to the lower risk facilities that wouldn't have met the criteria to do so before the pandemic. This was, I'm sure, done in an effort to consolidate costs to the state. Anyway, on Tuesdays, you get the new girls, either first entering the system for the first time or the transfers. One dorm in particular, the J dorm, received a massive influx of transfers in a relatively quick period. In every dorm, there is a box, like a plastic utility box or toolbox with a lock on it next to the officer's desk, which contains the cleaning chemicals for the dorm. And with COVID, the facility was being extremely serious about the cleaning regimens of each dorm to prevent illness and such. This box is supposed to always be locked, and you need the officer to unlock it as it contains bleach and other chemicals. But it typically isn't, as you have girls who have jobs during different periods of the day, and it's mandatory to do chores in the dorm. You're assigned, or you will be ticketed and face disciplinary actions, or just want to clean their rooms. And so it was usually a pain in the ass to the officers to have to unlock and lock it back up multiple times. In the dorms, we also had hot plates to cook on. I don't know what circumstances led to this fight, but two of the girls from Bedford ended up taking a spray bottle of bleach and boiled it on the burners, while most of the other women of the dorm had jobs during midday or classes. I want to say there was around 10 of us there at the time. I was on the phone with my boyfriend and could smell the odor even though they were right next to the open window boiling it, but no one was saying anything to them or asking what they were doing, and I didn't know it was bleach at the time. And I see the two girls constantly looking over there, shoulders towards the glass window with the officer at his desk at the other side, until one girl goes to the TV room, which is a separate room, but you can see into because it's surrounded in windows. She returns to the other girl at the burner, and the girl from the TV room gets up and walks into the dorm area where all the rooms are, and a few minutes later walks out with a fourth girl, and they go into the bathroom, while the two girls who'd been at the burner dump the liquid into a bowl. I was still on the phone, and I watched them walk into the bathroom. Then there's a lot of yelling and swearing, and I tell my boyfriend something bad is about to happen. And then I hear the most horrible sound I didn't think was possible ring out, and a splash hit the tile floor of the bathroom. I realized then that they just threw a boiling liquid on this girl. The officer comes running out, and the rest of us in the dorm stop everything we were doing. TV is shut off. I hang up my phone call, and we hear the struggle of the officer and these other women. Within a few minutes, dozens of other officers rush in, and the rest of us are put on count, where we are all sent to our rooms and must remain there. The injured girl screamed, and it was horrifying. I was shaking, and you would have thought she was dying. I didn't sleep right for weeks, and I can still hear her when I think of this. The two who attacked her and the one who led her in there were immediately put in shoe and were charged, and the injured girl was brought to a hospital outside of the facility. This was the most horrible thing I ever witnessed in my time in prison, and it's something that will haunt me forever. On a random note, I also did time with Anna Sorokin, aka Anna Delvey. Story 47. How little people cared about each other, like the guards. I'm not an ex-con, I was in jail. But the guards would openly let the gangs beat the crap out of people for reasons. They'd also beat the crap out of you for no reason, just they didn't like your attitude. Humanity is gone the moment you enter jail. Story 48. I was in high security jail for a year on a hacking crime. I can talk for days about prison, but I'll highlight some things that I found terrifying. Off topic, but I was in prison with England cricketer Chris Lewis, who got done for importing powder. My pad mate was a murderer who killed his wife. He was one of the soundest guys I've met, if I'm honest. He was an excellent chess player, and we'd play chess all day. He'd help with tobacco and food when I ran out, and never asked for it back. Really intelligent guy, but I could never find his crime in the UK papers. His name was John McCormick. He was from the London area, and this was around 2013, happened before that, but not sure when. If anybody can dig anything up, let me know, because I am interested to know what his case, what actually about. He didn't speak about it, and I didn't ask. Anyway, the first night there on induction wing, I heard an alarm ringing. The flap on my door was open, so I could see out my cell. The cell opposite me had its lights flashing, and officers, we call them screws, rushed to the cell. I seen through the door and seen a young lad hanging from his bed. That was disturbing, and I can no longer recall the image. My mind has blocked it out. I don't know what he was in for, but some people can't handle the time in jail, and this happens often. It took a while before outside paramedics arrived, but he was carted out in bag. He was gone a week later. I seen a Russian guy get his head stamped on in the yard by a gang of folks. I don't know what the issue was over, but they were standing in the area where substances parcels usually come in, so I assume it was related to substances. The guards stood back and did nothing because they were powerless against a gang of prisoners on the yard. They had to wait for the fight to break up before they could do anything. It worried me a little because I was a low-risk prisoner in a high-risk prison, and this happened on my first week in prison. In the same jail, a new lad was moved onto the wing. He bragged he was ex-army, and he was in for killing a pedo. He had a lot of status on the wing at the time. I had coffee with him a few times, and I worked as a wing cleaner with him. This one day, he got drunk on hooch. Officers locked him in his cell for the day. He went bat-crap crazy. There was an officer outside his cell ensuring no other prisoners could communicate with him. The guy smashed the glass window with his hand and grabbed a female officer around the throat. He was shipped off to a max security, a cat prison, Belmarsh, for a month, but then he came back and was put on the same wing. I don't know why this happened because he was definitely a danger. It later turned out he wasn't in the army, and he didn't kill a pedo. He killed an old man and buried him in his back garden. He took the bank card and was spending the guy's riches until he was caught. To this day, I cannot find anything in the media about this guy and what he done. I've seen a lot of crazy things, but never had any issues myself. If you're not involved in substances and you don't loan anything from anybody, for the most part it's plain sailing and you get on with folk as you would on the outside. UK prison is a lot different to us prison, and you don't have racial issues in prison very often. Prison surprised me because it wasn't what I expected at all. Us jails are a different ballgame. I would never like to end up in us jail. The food in UK jail is edible and sometimes pretty tasty. Us jail food looks disgusting in comparison. I've only been to jail once, and that was 10 years ago. Story 49. I don't know about terrifying, but I seen a guy get stabbed over 2 ramen noodle soups. I think the Eagles and the Saints were playing, and I seen a child molester get beat by like 25 to 30 people. They had an arrow flight him out. Story 50. My cellmate was truly crazy and was tortured by hallucinations. One day, he accidentally poked himself in the eye with a fork at lunch in front of everyone before the screws could get to him. He was screaming like a banshee when he ripped the first one out and threw it on the floor, and everyone just stared in shock, including the screws. At first, it looked like a skid or something. After the one was out, he went really quiet. I heard it pop. By that time, a couple of screws were already just about on him, and they took him down. Never saw him again after that, but I heard he was completely blinded, so quite a few of us never finished lunch, and some got some counseling because it was so violent and shocking. I still remember a screw picking the eye up with a clear plastic bag while we were all being filed out. Story 51. My first and last stay at the Indiana Department of Corrections. It was a nightmare that I still suffer from that has changed me for the worse. After being classified, I was transferred from RDC Reception Diagnostic Center to Westville Correctional Facility, also known as Perryville. This prison has horrendous stories and has even been investigated multiple times by the FBI for violence. Also, it is heavily segregated due to the high racism and violence. I met with their classification officer and given the information where I was staying. When I walked into the housing dorm and approached the guard to inquire where my bunk was, the officer looked up from his book. When he saw that I was white and our eyes met, I've never seen such fear in someone's eyes before. In an instant, he was out from behind his desk, grabbed me so fast, and literally dragged me from the dorm. In that instant, I lost everything because I wasn't expecting it, and I dropped everything. He dragged me into the outside hallway and pinned me to the wall. The guard got on his radio and literally started yelling for a white hat and officer, needs assistance. Within minutes, the hallway was full of other officers, and finally, a white height. It was then, when looking around, I noticed I was the only white in the hallway and dorm. The white hat yelled at me, asking me what I was doing there. I showed him my paperwork. The white hat started talking over his radio, inquiring as to why a white was being housed in an all-black dorm. I couldn't believe what I heard over the radio. Apparently, it was April 1st, and the classification officer thought it would be funny to house a white in an all-black violent dorm with high-security risk-level inmates. I was a level 10, the lowest security risk level. I should never have been housed in Westville to begin with. It's not over. That incident should have been a warning what was coming next. I was then finally transferred to Miami Correctional Facility behind the gate. Remember, I was a level 10. I should have been housed at the level 10 facility outside the gate. Later, it was discovered the classification officer at this facility misread my paperwork. Within 2 days, I was confronted and asked to see my paperwork. I had nothing to hide. I knew what they were looking for, but it didn't matter. I was serving 4 years for burglary. I handed over my paperwork. Then I heard the words, "No male in prison wants to hear." The guy I handed over the paperwork to said my paperwork was fake, and I printed it in the law library. I was a molester, and that I even looked like one. Then out of the blue, someone said their people on the outside even verified I was a molester. At that moment, all I can think was, how damn is my paperwork fake? How damn could I have printed it in the law library, seeing I haven't even stepped into one yet, and this is my first and only criminal offense. I have no record of anything else. Before I knew it, I was out. I remember nothing more. I woke up in the infirmary 3 months later. I was beaten so badly, multiple concussions, broken nose, jaw, orbital socket, teeth, hand, 3 ribs, and leg. I served the rest of my time in protective custody. According to a guard I spoke to, some of the inmates involved were told later they were wrong about my conviction and paperwork. The inmate's response, "I look like a molester, which makes me a molester, too bad for me." According to the guard, this was true of the inmate's way of thinking and the prison rules. Even if you're not a molester and your paperwork clears you, you better hope you don't look like one. How has this changed me? I seriously distrust men and people now. I've bulked up, learned boxing among other things. Quick to anger and defend myself. I have a serious hatred for men now. I'll fight strike first to ensure nothing bad happens to me. I've grown a beard, got tattoos, and make sure to dress in such a way to ensure no one thinks I look like a molester. I've stayed clear of breaking the law, barely. I've been told I've become a heart of hole now. Story 52. Not my story, but rather a guy I know who was a co. Said an inmate decided it would be funny to crap in his cell and then spread it all over himself and the cell so the guards would have to clean him in the cell up. Imagine his surprise when they just didn't. Also didn't let him out for like a week, so he just sat in there, covered in crap, surrounded by everything covered in crap. Every single other inmate within sniffing distance, absolutely livid because the entire place reeks of crap. Story 53. I spent time in county on misdemeanors. During my first week, an alcoholic died in the cell below me. We could hear him moaning and calling for help, and the guards had been in multiple times. The last time I heard the guard tell the bum to deal with his bad choices like a man. The man had a seizure and died in that cell in a pool of crap. The following week, the jail was on lockdown, and inmates were rioting in their cells. Fire sprinklers were broken and the pods flooded. I saw multiple inmates hauled out after being peppered and subdued. The guards left the inmates not participating alone in their cells, just bored. This all happened in a relatively small town jail, population approximately 80,000. The man who died was a well-known homeless fixture. He was known for getting petty charges to have a warm bed during especially cold nights. He was arrested for drinking on the courthouse lawn. I consider this to be terrifying because as an incarcerated individual, your medical care is given through the facility, and I have never met a more callous individual than the medical staff in jail. Story 54. Not a con, but I was a co for a year before I got out of that job. Pretty much we had an inmate who broke his tablet, don't know if it was on purpose or accident, and decided to throw it in the trash and claim he never got one. So we go through all the trash and find the tablet and ask him whether he broke it or not. It should have been an easy fix, honestly. The guy would get written up and probably sanctioned for a week or two, but he'd get a new one. Instead, he swears that the tablet isn't his, he didn't break it, and he wants a working tablet. Thing is, we take accountability of almost all items we issue to inmates, so we know it's his. While trying to get the guy to just admit what he did, he decides he'd rather stab himself in the stomach instead. I've seen people get shot and had bullets flying over my head, but that is by far the craziest, wildest crap I've ever seen. Between instances like that, and seeing way too many former friends or acquaintances as inmates at my facility, I decided that it wasn't the job for me. Story 55. Clyde Barrow of Bonnie and Clyde fame was sentenced to hard time for robbery at Eastham Prison, Texas. A prison so cruel and harsh it gained the name the Bloody Ham. Guards would never intervene with the prisoners unless someone was actively getting murdered, and even then they didn't care. To keep order, they employed especially psycho prisoners as building tenders to beat the rest into submission. Ed Crowder was one such man. He was a sadistic abuser who preyed on the smallest guy in the room. Clyde was famously scrawny and little, but he was incredibly tenacious. For 10 months, Crowder brutally abused Clyde. The other prisoners were just happy they weren't the ones targeted. Eventually, Clyde had enough. He got into contact with another building tender, a lifer called Scally, who hated Crowder almost as much as Clyde did. Clyde told him he was going to kill Crowder. Scally told him he would take the blame for the murder, as he was doing life anyway. One night, Clyde sauntered past Crowder's bunk and walked alone into the showers. A prime target. Crowder lurched after him, cornering Clyde with a smirk. Clyde took out a concealed lead pipe and destroyed Crowder's skull. Scally then came out of the shadows and shanked the body several times, giving himself an intentional slash on the ribs. The guards thought it was an open and shut case, and Clyde got away with it. It was his first murder. He was very grateful to Scally for taking the rap and promised to break him out. A few years later, he stayed true to his word. Now, in the middle of his crime spree with Bonnie, they raided the prison with machine guns, freeing 5 prisoners in the process. They planned a mass breakout, but Clyde particularly wanted to free Scally. Unfortunately for them, he was not freed. Story 56. Okay, so I went to prison in 2020, not like the county jail. The county jail is a place where you await trial and sentencing for whatever crime you committed. Once you receive your sentence, if it is greater than a year, you generally get sent to prison, a bigger facility with more to do. Well, after sitting in the county for a while, the bus came to pick us up and off we went. Now in my state, Georgia, they sent you to a diagnostic prison before going to the prison you'll be at for the remainder of your sentence. And for men, it's called Jackson State Prison. They put me in an open dorm with bunks 3 high. I was in there with lifers, murderers, and predators. Gang violence in prison is real. Anyway, in the dorm I was in, these 2 guys got in an argument over I don't know what, and it escalated pretty fast. One dude was a blood and the other dude a crip. So soon it was an all-out brawl, and the crip dude ended up beating his face with knife. The guards never came in. Eventually everything worked itself out, and no one died. Crazy how prison has its own politics. Damn that place. Damn that. Story 57. I was in Lawrenceville Penitentiary in VA from 2011 to 2014. From a penitentiary standpoint, it was quite accommodating. They had all the substances, alcohol, cigs, and cell phones you could ever dream of. I was working in the kitchen towards the middle of my bit, making myself an egg sandwich one morning. This young dude got into a dispute with a dude everybody knew as Unc, who, by the way, was a super quiet guy who didn't mess with anyone. They were apparently arguing over a cigarette when the young buck called Unc a git. Unc grabbed an institutional can of green beans. Baseball pitched it across the kitchen and nailed young buck in the face. Unc ran over to young buck, picked the can back up, and beat him across the face with it. When he was done ripping young buck's face off with that can, he spit on him and said, "That's what happens when you call a real man a git." That was the last time I ever called any man a git. I learned so much about respect in there. I haven't been to prison in over 4 years. I've also been sober since then, too. Thank you, Unc. I hope you're well. Story 58. Massive open wound flesh gashes made by herself on her forearms and top of the legs that she used to hide things in, like paintbrushes, coffee rations, pens, etc. I could literally see her bones. Story 59. So I'm a woman and was locked up in county jail for quite a while. Every time someone comes in with substances or paraphernalia, it's a big deal. And depending on who you know and how you handle the situation, it can end very bad for that person. One time a girl, she was in her early 20s, came in with a met pipe. She was very open about this and let everyone in the pod use it. Just a few hours later, she asked for it back and said she was rolling out to a different pod. The major problem with this is that the pipe was now full of someone else's met. About 10 girls lined up and jumped her. It was a free-for-all. She was screaming for help, but none came. Then 2 women took her into the bathroom and closed the door. The thing about jail/prison is that there's really only one place you're going to put something that you're trying to hide on you, and that's inside you. So a few minutes later, the 2 come out and are wiping the blood off their hands. They had got the pipe back. A few minutes later, the girl comes out crying, and her pants are soaked with blood. She gets the deputy's attention this time. She was pregnant, she said. She had a miscarriage, and the jail released her due to the incident. Story 60. An older man, who was in the cell next to mine, was on oxygen. They would give him food, but he never ate it. He constantly complained, so that didn't help. He would be on the ground with food everywhere, and the guard would make the inmates pick him up. This guy died a week later because of lack of vitamin K. Basically, they starved him to death. That's what lack of vitamin K means. His health prevented him from eating his meals. Story 61. I saw one guy get his face smashed in with a backy ball as retaliation for being called out in front of the yard for an unpaid chocolate bar debt. And another guy got a razor blade slashed to the face, presumably over a beef carried over from the street. Story 62. Got a few stories myself, but the one that I'll always remember is one told by my mate's dad. He had a cellmate who was a big, burly farmer-type guy and was serving time for killing his wife and her lover. My mate's dad says one night while they were sleeping, the guy jumps out of his bunk screaming at the top of his lungs. He was having nightmares about the situation and couldn't get out of his head what happened that day. The guy walked in on his wife in bed with another man. Farmer guy pulls out his shotgun and blasts the lover first. When he got his senses together, he saw his wife running towards him, so he accidentally shoots her head off. Story 63. A girl took her life because she didn't want to be released after serving her time. And a girl was beaten by officers, and they killed her. And the reason people were there just blew my mind. Story 64. I recently had a moon pie for the first time in years, and it reminded me of the night I heard a man get killed by his cellmate. Dude must have been out his mind because all you heard was the wet slap of continuous stabs. Thankfully, that time is long behind me. Story 65. These women were arguing. One was sitting on the ground and the other was towering over her. The girl on the ground spit an ice cube in the girl's face. I've never seen someone flung so far that her weave ripped out upon takeoff. Story 66. My brother, UK prison. My brother could hold his own in a fight and came from a rough area growing up. My parents moved to give me a better life. So he worked his way up the ranks in prison. I'll tell two of many stories. One, my brother had OCD amongst many other mental health issues. He collected sanitary products, had to have a few of each thing at any given time. He would sell them too in exchange for cigs and stuff. He had lots of different stuff, all good, worked the prison kitchen to afford them. Well, the guards didn't like that he was making bank and had his own team of sellers and buyers and tried to shut it down. It wasn't illegal or anything, but they rushed my brother's cell, messed everything up and took everything, gutted bare. So he organized a revolt, which essentially ended in a 12-hour standoff with him and some others chilling on the roof of the prison, refusing to come down. He peed on an officer when they tried to club the outside of the building up to him. 2. They found out a guy soon to be released into Gen Pop, previously in solitary, was a pedo and abuser on multiple counts. He was boasting about it to the guards, so the guards spoke about it in hearing distance to inmates in Gen Pop, even specifying the guard change. Long story short, that scum ended up disabled with no eyes and no P3 NIS and a sore ass. So many inmates were involved they couldn't punish one person for it, but they were forced to show they would do something. My brother and a couple other inmates for a few months added, and that's it. Story 67. One guy was telling how he murdered a guy who stole from him, and after he killed, he found the crap that he thought the other guy stole. Another guy sitting in the room listening to the story also started to laugh, and the one telling the story turned around and said to the guy laughing his head off, "What the heck are you laughing about? You had 2 persons in your freezer. Did you have frozen pizza in there too?" And the whole room busted out in laughter, including myself, as the situation was so surrealistic. Also saw a guy who had hanged himself in his room, and the normal looks of pedo that could be anyone freaked me out. If you want to know how a criminal looks like, take a look in the mirror. It could be anyone. That is scary. Story 68. Not prison, but jail. I watched 4 guys jump one dude, beat and kick him so badly that his whole head was black and blue. He came into the bathroom 3 times in the span of 15. 20 mins asking the exact same questions. Still stays with me to this day. Quite traumatizing. Story 69. How long does it take to get used to taking a dump in a small room with another random person? I've worked, medical, in jails, and that is the worst part from what I could see. Well, and the food. I need to be alone. A lot. And mancos are total uneducated bananas in most jails. In one county, they and the majors in charge actually cared and tried to be good to the inmates that weren't a holes. But most places, they are bananas that even mess with the mentally ill folks for fun. Story 70. I don't have any absolutely horrid stories. I didn't do any state time, but just the general disregard for the safety of the inmates. Especially during COVID, where we're on a good day, but sometimes stuck in the cell 4 days straight. Fed in the cell, no showers in that time, etc. There would be very obvious altercations in some of the cells. I remember seeing Cert drag 2 guys outside of a cell, probably an hour after they got in the fight. One dude was unconscious, the other was all bloodied. Rumor was that the unconscious kid died and the other dude was charged for murder. Neither of them ever made it back to the pod. I just can't help but feel that if with any sort of decent regard for human life, the kid could have been saved. Story 71. Not been in prison as a con, but went through the recruitment process looking at a change in my career. Once you're pretty much guaranteed a position, they do a walk around the prison and give you a chance to meet a few inmates in offices. Inmates seemed acceptable enough and as per expected, but on one wing, I got chatting to an officer who had only started roughly 2 months previously. At that point, he'd worked 49 days out of 53, each at 11, 13-hour shift. He was absolutely knacked and looked awful. And the worst part was, he said, after only his 3rd day, he was left alone on the wing to open up and lock up. This guy was only in his early 20s. He was already looking for a way out of the career. That was enough for me to say no thanks on the offer. Story 72. I had a coworker who was a prison guard for John Wayne Gacy. Killer clown. Apparently, he was normally a very calm, nicely mannered inmate. But one day, she is alone with him in his cell going over some paperwork regarding his sentence. And he just looked over at her with these dark shark eyes and said, "How many times do you think I could stab you with this pen before the other guards got here?" She said it was the most uncomfortable she had ever been in her entire life. And this woman worked in the max security section of a Chicago prison for 20 years. Story 73. My father was in prison in South Africa for 12 years. He spent a lot of time with the worst people all around the world. He's from Liverpool, England. He speaks and reads perfect English. Therefore, he read the letters written in English of his fellow convicts. The story that really sticks with me is, there was an Albanian man who was get sex up for locking club bouncers in a dog kennel and setting them on fire. He used to fight off all the prison guards. A real nut job. He asked my father to read his letter. In brief, the letter was from his government saying he will never be released from this prison and he will never be seen as a civilian again. My dad A is a lovely person, and I will never reveal anything about his sentence, but nevertheless, he told this crazy man that the letter was just from his family saying how much they loved him and hoped he was okay. The man was made up and left my father alone, but my dad knew deep down how he would have reacted if he told him the truth. Story 74. Not prison, but jail. There was this kid in the cell next to me. Velcro jackets, if you get what I mean. No older than 20, I swear. I'm guessing he had schizophrenia or something, but the guards taunted him relentlessly until he tried to take his own life by bashing his head against the wall. Then they tackled him to the ground and restrained him to a chair while the nurse was called over. They kept taunting the poor kid, and I'm guessing he broke a part of the chair while struggling. So then they started yelling at him about how he's destroyed government property and was going to get another charge and be there even longer, which of course sent him into another spiral of rage and panic. And it just carried on like that, with them taunting him into attempting died for the fun of it. And the poor kid was so desperate to die that he started swallowing pieces of plastic and batteries, whatever he could find. For me, the worst part was that I couldn't actually see most of what happened, but I could hear it. It was so ducked up, and there was nothing I could do but sit there and listen to some kid being relentlessly tormented to the point of absolutely losing his mind. Story 75. This doesn't really belong here, and will probably get buried by now, but it's an interesting yet sad story nonetheless. A family friend worked as a co in a couple different prisons in Southern California. He once told me that one of the saddest things he saw was that for a lot of inmates, they don't realize what their true talents or gifts or passions are until they're behind bars, when it's too late. He has seen inmates who were amazing artists, as good as Disney animators. He saw inmates in the electronics shop that were so gifted, they could have easily been electrical engineers, mathematicians, or at least electricians. It came so easy to them. He saw inmates in the wood shop who were gifted woodworkers. He's seen inmates who could easily have been chemists, writers, mechanics, teachers, chefs, barbers, tattoo artists, personal trainers, and on and on and on. A lot of these guys should have been productive members of society, but got dealt a bad hand at the start of their lives, and just went down the wrong path because they had a bad upbringing. He said the wasted potential was just heartbreaking. Story 76. I was only in for a week in a female prison. Wasn't horrifying, but what disgusted me? The absolute filth. One rag with no cleaning product to clean the floor, sink, toilet, and shower. No eating utensils. Eat with your hands or off the tray, and the trays are rinsed with water. No brushes or dishwashing liquid. No shampoo or any toiletries. Youngster in for breaking her baby's leg. One high-profile killer in our country. Escort who killed a guy with her partner and left him in the boot at a casino. Who told me I was disgusting because my hair was dirty. I replied that I found murder disgusting. And all she could talk about was her BF and how she needed to look good for him when she was him in court. He was also on trial for the murder. And just how callous she was in talking about her hair and sharing snacks with others. Randomly, very high school means girl vibes. Woman talking to someone else about how the social workers had turned her 13-year-old daughter against her, and her daughter had shown no loyalty to her mother by telling the social worker how her mom knew about the stepdad molesting her but hadn't done anything about it. This grown woman was disgustedly complaining about how bad her daughter was for not covering her part in the abuse. Story 77? How depending on what you're in for, you could be screwed immediately. When I went in, people immediately checked my papers aggressively. The second they saw I was in for a short stay misdemeanor, everyone relaxed and told me that they're sorry they got me on bullcrap and to not worry and that I'll be out soon. We all just waited and talked till we got our uniforms. Then we were all in solitary except for 5 minutes out of the day for a phone call. The worst part was being in that box alone with my thoughts for days. No books or TV or anything. Never want to do that crap again. Story 78. I saw a lot of ducked up crap, but nothing quite haunts me, like the time my cellmate got third-degree burns on his penis trying to smuggle an MRE heat pack back to our cell. Story 79. Went to a scared straight style program when I was wasn't in it, just documenting it. However, this program was a little on the more ducked up end. The kids met a guy named Rick. Rick was a super sweet individual, very, very friendly, very confident and expressive, told jokes with a huge smile on his face, asks the kids, "You know why I'm in here?" Kids say no. he says, because I killed my entire family at your age. He then proceeded to tell them how exactly he did it, right up to their faces, still charismatic, still nice and everything. Never have I ever been more scared of an individual person. Story 80. I saw a guy tweaking hard on some kind of substances and try and cut off his little friend. He kept crying as he was trying to saw it off. We were all horrified. The guards made us clean up his blood. It was pretty wild. 10 tenths would visit again. Story 81. Watched a guy swan dive off of the top tier of Outpod onto his head at breakfast, and it splattered everywhere like a crap balloon, while we were eating oatmeal and instant scrambled eggs. Story 82. I have friends and family that have done hard time in the U.S. federal prison system. What few stories they've told have always communicated a very subtle, nuanced fact, which is, to me, more terrifying than much of what I'm reading in this thread. There are people in this world who are truly pure evil. They revel in acts of extreme ruthlessness, violence, and sadism. They are far, far beyond any hope of rehabilitation or reform and are, according to these criminals I know so well, cut from a very different cloth than the rest of us. They come from all manners of ethnicity, creed, cultural background, and socioeconomic status. There is a huge difference between the ex-cons I know and these men. According to the anecdotes, they are few and far apart, but they are there. This is what's always scared me most about prison, being in close confines with these things. Story 83. I was at a level 3 prison in Ohio. When you're in a disciplinary block, you get rec outside in essentially a little cage built like a rectangle, big enough to walk back and forth, and has a pull-up dip bar. 2 people to a cage. They must have put these 2 dudes in the same cage unknowingly, but I'm a skeptic because COs do get paid off. Anyway, one of the dudes pull out a knife and he starts going crazy with it, beating the guy over and over, and the guy is running with nowhere to go. The co's on duty. We're terrified, and it took way too long to get the situation under control. The life flight helicopter landed outside the prison within 30 minutes. On a side note, where I was, they had ambulances every week up there. They'd usually pronounce them dead once they left the prison property to avoid some legal recourse, I believe.